Hey, what's up? We're back again with another video, and today we're going to be going over Theater of Pain, which is the first B tier dungeon. I'm actually super hot on Theater of Pain, and I'm actually really excited for it to be coming in the Shadowlands. But yeah, so for those who don't know about Theater of Pain is a fairly linear style dungeon with low mob density, where it's like 3 to 5 mobs at the most per pack. So it's like really low, like King's Rest level pack size, just so you can kind of get a point of reference for what you're going to be looking at whenever you go into Theater of Pain for whenever I start talking about this dungeon. And let's just jump straight into the video and just talk about why. We'll talk first and foremost with the upsides, and I think the biggest upside for this dungeon is that it has well-designed bosses. Gorechop is like this big meathead boss where he's got this cleaver and you have to dodge this barbed wire that like crosses the room, and he'll like grip you in periodically. Feels like a great fight. There's Zav, which is this PvP boss where you have to PvP your friends. There's some strategy behind it too, because if you win the PvP duel, then you get a damage bonus. So determining who should be the one to win the duel is actually kind of important, because you want to be layering cooldowns with that. And then Kultharak, which is the collect your soul and then gain a damage buff boss. I think all three of these fights are absolutely spectacular by design. The first boss, I could take it or leave it. The final boss is actually pretty good as well, but I think that there are some things that make the final boss challenging, but it feels challenging in a fairly rewarding way. But yeah, I think that the well-designed bosses in Theater of Pain work super well for how this dungeon is designed. It is a 5-boss instance, and it's relatively low trash density, so having these fun, sick fights, and they kind of feel epic in that regard, makes a lot of sense for a dungeon like this. The next upside that I have is as far as linear dungeons go, this one really gives you the most opportunities to create your own path. Basically, there are these pathways whenever you drop down from the Affront of Champions, which is the first boss, and you're able to go in 3 different directions, reaching either Zav, Gorechop, or Kultharak. And this is going to be a really interesting take on a linear style dungeon, because you have these pathways that you're able to go through. This allows you to have strategies implemented at the beginning of the dungeon where you decide where you want to bloodlust, potentially, for like the second or third lust of the dungeon, where you're going to be spawning your prides at the 20, 40, 60, and 80 marks, because the 100 one is more likely than not going to be in the same spot every single time. So yeah, where you're going to spawn your prides. And you have like decisions based on like what order you want to go for in the bosses, what direction you want to go with your trash, where you really feel like you need these bloodlusts or these pride mobs, the buffs from those to be used. And you're able to just kind of make decisions in terms of where you're going to go with that. The last upside that I have for this dungeon is just because it's a linear dungeon, the burden of not going over trash count substantially is significantly higher. Theater of Pain does a great job of not pushing you a wild amount over trash count. There are mobs historically, I'm looking at you, King's Rest, that feels kind of similar to how Theater of Pain works out, but they end up pushing you very much over how much count you actually need, to where you have to bring classes like Rogue, you have to pop an invisibility potion, you have to use some utility like that, whereas Theater of Pain does not function like that at all. You're able to just get 100% of your enemy forces just by naturally walking through the dungeon. So think of like workshop with obelisks. It's really easy to be able to get 100% enemy forces count. Or think of any dungeon with obelisks. It's really easy to get 100% enemy forces count and not feel like you're going to hit like the 130% mark. Theater of Pain is just designed well as a default for how much percentage of your enemy forces the dungeon is going to be giving you versus how much trash you have to be pulling. So now let's talk about some of the downsides. One of the major downsides is that it's hard to be innovative in this dungeon. There's no like huge ability to be able to like chain pull trash packs, plus like the low mob count in terms of like mob density, and then like the high boss density really makes the level of innovation you can do in this dungeon kind of low. As a whole, I think that's just the way that linear dungeons, especially strict linear dungeons, such as Theater of Pain, such as Workshop, such as King's Rest, are always going to be, where you are like significantly more boss focused, and you're going to have like low trash density pulls that may be a little bit more challenging because they are like that. But the dungeon as a whole leads to lower amounts of innovation that you can come up with because of just like these limiting factors. Like the bosses are always approximately going to take certain amount of time. So the trash is like separated in a way, or the trash mobs are not able to be pulled together because of one reason or another. That just makes it difficult to be innovative in a dungeon like Theater of Pain. The next downside, and the reason that I ended up actually giving this a B instead of an A, is that I worry that the replayability of this dungeon is going to be lower compared to some of the other dungeons, purely because a large majority of this dungeon is more boss focused and it's like low trash density. It ties in with tandem with it's like hard to be innovative in this dungeon. So I worry that the replayability and like the meta will be set in stone super early, to where like once you end up doing this dungeon over and over again, it loses the allure and it loses the feel of like being a super epic and sick dungeon, just because like you know how the dungeon is going to work from the first time you end up doing it. And if the meta strategy for which pathway you go down, how you're pulling some of the trash packs, that kind of thing doesn't change all that much, then there's no real like innovation, or there's no real way for you to be able to feel better once you go into that dungeon. And the replayability of it is going to suffer purely because of that. I guess another minor downside that's kind of on my radar is I do worry that this is going to lead to another fiasco where Tyrannical is substantially harder in this dungeon comparatively to other dungeons than Fortified was, similar to how King's Rest was, where you knew like going into KR it was low mob density and it was like high boss count, so Fortified was going to be substantially easier. Tyrannical always is going to be a lot worse because of that kind of thing, and I worry that Theater of Pain may end up reaching that state as well. That's to be seen. That's like a minor downside. That's why it's like a really minor downside and kind of like a caveat. Like I hope this doesn't happen, and I hope that they get the balancing on this dungeon structured well. So for the last few dungeons, I've been going through and talking about a couple things that I would change about this dungeon to actually make it better. For Theater of Pain, I actually feel like there isn't a ton that I could really do, or that I can really see that would make this dungeon a lot better. I really feel like, in terms of a strict linear dungeon that's going to limit your amount of innovation, it's going to limit like how you can pull or how fast you're going to be able to even make it through the dungeon. This dungeon is like really well designed. I am astonished with how well Theater of Pain was designed for a strictly linear dungeon. If they could have replaced King's Rest from BFA with Theater of Pain, I think that a lot more people would have had a significantly better experience with King's Rest, because this dungeon is just so well designed, and they took all of the problems that existed inside of KR and removed them from Theater of Pain. I really enjoy this dungeon, and I suspect that this will be one of the better dungeons. I don't think it's going to be one of the greatest, because it's hard to innovate strategy with a dungeon like this, but I think it's going to be on the good spectrum. And with that said, that will be the end of the video today. This is probably going to end up being one of the shorter dungeon kind of reviews, but I actually genuinely feel like Theater of Pain is in a really good spot, and there wasn't a lot to harp on negatively about this dungeon. I think that just by design, linear dungeons kind of lend themselves to being a little bit lower on the rankings because it's hard to come up with new strategies as a whole. So I think it just takes away some of the Mythic Plus like fun scale, because none of the packs are like, holy shit, this is the greatest pull of all time. There's a lot of pad that I can do here. I'm going to be topping overall DPS. I am the sickest player alive kind of stuff. And it's more of like it's a slower paced game for sure. And I think that because of that, Theater of Pain is going to be good for what it is. But is it going to be the most fun thing of all time? Probably not. But that will be the end of the video today. I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day. Comment down in the comment section below if you thought I missed something from Theater of Pain. I have played this dungeon, I want to say like 5 times, and I do still find it pretty great. But maybe there's something that you have found obnoxious or unfun in this dungeon that maybe I missed. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below, and I will see you guys tomorrow.